All right, so welcome to this episode of Cancast. Today I've got the absolutely gorgeous Chelsea Leyland, who is a DJ and a cannabis activist who's currently in New York with me. Thanks for joining me, Chelsea.
Thanks for having me.
It's really good to see you. I've not seen you in person for so long. It's weird not going to the events and sort of bumping into people. And actually when Chelsea's at an event, I'm actually like really pleased because it's like cannabis events tend to be a lot of suits and business people and, you know, investors and things like that. And I'm usually the only person in the room that's sort of like just a normal human. And then when Chelsea's there, I'm like, oh, thank God, there's someone else normal here, which is really cool. So I've not managed to catch up with you for so long. Really cool.
And another woman, most important.
And then, yeah, absolutely. That is a point, actually. Is
Definitely.
that it is a massively male-dominated space. And you know, we're advocating for a female plant, so I find that quite odd. Have you found that everywhere you've been? Because I suppose you've done a lot more traveling with it than I have.
I mean, it's interesting because I sort of feel like whenever there's the, the real kind of business side coming in, then yes, it's certainly more male dominated. I mean, do I think that the space itself is male dominated? I think there are a lot of females operating in this space. Unfortunately, it's sort of like whether or not they really get that seat at the table. I went to, I think probably the best cannabis event conference that I've been to was by Broccoli magazine, which is a cannabis magazine. Based here. And it was called In Bloom, and that was incredible because it was all women. I think I don't think they said that men weren't allowed to come. It was just mostly sort of advertised to females. There was like, you know, a handful of guys there that were just great because they were like, you know, I want to support women, and it was just so nice to be in a room where, I mean, you know, so many women, but also just like real, like, as we were talking, normal humans dressed in color, like, because I spoke on a panel, and I remember just looking out and being like, there was just so much color, and I was like, this is what cannabis is to me. I mean, like, so I think, you know, where there's money and there's people raising investors, then it becomes unfortunately very male dominated. But I think we always need to come back to the fact that, you know, historically the healers have been women, and this plant, as you say, like, we are using the female part of the plant, so that's all of that as well.
And I guess, you know, I suppose the cannabis conversation has been the same, hasn't it, for years and years and years. And I didn't think that it really shifted until women stepped up in this space. So, you know, like Hannah and Charlotte for their kids in the UK, you know, Charlotte Figgy, I guess, in the States. You know, there's been women who feel, I guess, more safe.
Yeah, and sort of pioneering it. I think in a way that's sort of a kind of like a nice indication of, I mean, again, it comes back to my point about really being the sort of the healers of the world, and that bringing in that slightly more, you know, I don't know whether it's like the maternal side, you know, really, I guess, kind of fighting for what matters, and why, bringing it back again to like, why is this plant so important, you know, and really coming back to the medicine, I think, fundamentally at its core, before the business side. I mean it's, you know, cannabis was looking promising, I think, the industry in terms of kind of female executives, and I think it was like one of the highest numbers than any other industry, and unfortunately that percentage dropped down. I can't remember where it was. I think it was like 26%, I think. Could be wrong on that, but then it just keeps dropping, and that is really, the more money that's poured into the industry, then unfortunately we see, you know, we see that number dropping. But I think there's a lot of potential there to bring in that kind of more feminine energy when we, you know, think of the plant, talk about the plant, that maternal energy, you know.
Yeah, totally. It's a bit of a rebrand, I think, what's needed generally for cannabis, isn't it? I suppose, you know, particularly in the UK, and I don't really know what it would be like for you guys over there in New York, but there's been a sort of, I don't know, I guess it's been a particularly sort of, it's been associated with kids smoking weed, you know, like we all did as kids smoking weed on BMX bikes, or you know, lads going around on scooters, and it's kind of like been that sort of like vibe, hasn't it, for a while? And I think the rebrand that's needed possibly to get over the stigma is the fact that actually, if you strip all of that away and look at what this does to the body, this is a medicine. Beyond everything else, this is a medicine, isn't it?
Definitely.
And it's about like allowing that rebrand, I guess, to happen.
Yeah, and it's education, isn't it? And I always think of it like you know, it's kind of somewhat similar to when, you know, people were trying to push kind of like gay marriage forward, you know, in the sense that like everybody knew someone, you were either gay yourself, or your cousin was, your brother was, your mother was, you know what I mean? And I think I always look at cannabis in a similar way, in that we all know someone that's sick, right? So whether you're sick, your aunt's sick, your brother's sick, your sister's sick, like you are going to know someone who probably is going to benefit from cannabis as a medicine. And I always think all it takes is like, we need that kind of, it needs to be close, it needs to be familiar, we need to feel it. And as soon as we feel it, then I think the you know, the kind of mindset shifts. So whether, you know, you see that with like politicians and whoever it is, where like, you know, anti-cannabis, and the next thing you know, your wife gets sick with cancer and really benefits from the kind of, you know, the medicinal and therapeutic properties of the plant. So and that's always interesting, because then you ask the question like, does someone really need to get sick? Do we really need to feel it that closely to relate? We shouldn't do. We should be able to say, oh, I can see your story, I can see that, you know, you've got epilepsy and you're telling me that, and you're telling me that you benefited from this plant. You know, I think it's sort of like we need to soften and be able to you know, be more empathetic with people, rather than just sort of have that kind of, well, this doesn't affect me, so I can't relate, you know.
But they will relate to them at some point in their lives.
Exactly.
It's just, I suppose you're right, it's about, you know, does it need to get that close?
Exactly. And it's a shame when it does, you know, because we all should be able to just open our hearts up a little bit more and be like, that's the sick person, if they're, you know, if they're benefiting from this plant, this medicine, you know, hallelujah. And real education. I mean, it's definitely happening slowly. I mean, it's an interesting one for me, particularly. I mean, obviously there's a change in legislation in the UK, you know, a couple of years ago now. Things are changing there, not at the rate that I think any of us would like it to be. And then, you know, I live in New York, and now New York have just announced that, you know, they're changing legislation, which is super, super exciting. I think, you know, for me, New York was already in a great place. That's because I have epilepsy, and so it's a qualifying condition. So I was lucky in that. But, you know, I know a lot of friends and people kind of in my network that have really severe anxiety or really severe insomnia, and it's really debilitating, and they couldn't get access because it wasn't a qualifying condition. So lucky in the sense that, you know, I had a qualifying condition, but definitely saw there was still so much work to be done. So it is fantastic that this is happening there. But then, like, on the flip side of that, you know, it's like my sister's living in care in the UK, and we're still fighting every day, and we still don't have access to any form of cannabis-based treatments for her. So it's frustrating, because it's like I'm trying to enjoy and feel the change, but then when I come back to really kind of like personal level, my family, you know, I feel just like a lot of anger and frustration, because it's just I just can't believe we're still being met with the same attitude. It just feels like the attitude isn't even changing. So, you know, it's frustrating, and it's in many respects kind of like a race against time with my sister. And it would be really, you know, it would be really tragic to have done all the work that I've been doing and being so involved in the space, and, you know, and God forbid something happens to her, and we know that we were never even able to try it as a medicine. And that's where it's really, really frustrating.
Your case and your sister's case, it really highlights the sort of polar differences, doesn't it? So it's a really, well, obviously it's gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching that you're in the situation you are. And maybe for people that don't know, could you tell us a little bit about that backstory, Chelsea, just so that people might not know that story? Obviously I'm really familiar, but
yeah, of course. So my sister has a more severe form of epilepsy. Her condition doesn't really have a specific name. You know, she's got temporal lobe epilepsy. Started having seizures as a baby. So she has daily seizures. Very rare that she won't have any seizures in one day. You know, can I have up to sort of 70, 100 seizures in a day? And, you know, has kind of spent her life in and out of hospital, because she goes into status epilepticus, which is sort of back-to-back seizures where they can't be stopped. And that's when, you know, obviously the real brain damage is unfortunately kind of, you know, done during that time. And she has mild autism as well. she moved away from home probably around the age of about 7, went to live, or attend a kind of school for children with special needs. It was also becoming really challenging, obviously, for my family to kind of take care of her because it's pretty full on. And then I was diagnosed. I was, the sort of cognitively healthy child up until I started showing symptoms around the age of 13. And wasn't diagnosed for a couple of years. Around 15, I was diagnosed with a type of epilepsy known as myoclonic epilepsy, JME. And, that was obviously a real shock for myself and my family, particularly because we thought, my sister was sort of, the kind of one with an illness and I was healthy. And I was sort of put on a cocktail of medication. And, in comparison to my sister, it's been, much easier in terms of I live a normal life for the most part. Yes, I've had seizures. Yes, it's been a struggle. Yes, it's been it's been a real journey, but obviously in comparison it's really nothing. But I suffered a lot from side effects from anticonvulsants.
Yeah,
really was always, and have always been very sensitive, and I didn't respond well to them, but didn't have a choice. So for me, the idea of coming off medicine was, it was a dream that I didn't really entertain, because I was told you'll be taking this indefinitely, you'll need to take this through pregnancy. And then I discovered cannabidiol, CBD, around 4 years ago. And it completely changed my life. And I haven't had one seizure since. I still have myoclonic jerks, which are sort of very, very small type of seizures. So when I say I haven't had seizures, I'm really referring to the grand mals, aka tonic-clonics, they're now called. Well, first of all, after about 6 months of using CBD, I managed to wean off all my traditional pharmaceuticals, which was just incredible.
Yeah.
And so lucky and so fortunate. And I always think it's really important for me to say that, cannabis isn't a one size fits all. And just because it works for one in a certain way doesn't mean it necessarily works for another. And that's can be really heartbreaking, particularly like when you're advocating for it in a way that I have done. And then I meet people that have exactly the same type of epilepsy and just haven't had the same experience with it. I know some that have managed to reduce down off their current meds. I know others that really hasn't done very much for them. Maybe it's helped with some of the other side effects. And then I've met other JME patients who have the same story and have weaned off. So that's important to mention. And then the other thing, I'll say too, is that I'm really, really grateful and fortunate because not only has it helped my seizures, but I'm also now using a medicine that helps me with my anxiety and helps me with my sleep. So when I was on medication, I wasn't sleeping and I had terrible anxiety. I'm sure some of that was, worse side effects from the meds, but also just being who I am as a person and probably living with a chronic condition is, can make you pretty anxious. So now my health is definitely in a much better place. I use cannabis medicinally most days. I highlight that just because, for years I used cannabis daily and I never thought that I would be able to not use it, every single day. And now I'm in a position that when I'm in homeostasis, I'm balanced, I'm well rested, I'm well fed, I'm calm. There are days, that I can miss a day, and that also feels like a huge, huge step for me, because I'm very aware of those days, and I'm like, I haven't medicated today, I haven't taken anything.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so great. That's so great.
And then, unfortunately, my family and I are still fighting for access for my sister, who lives at the Epilepsy Society in the UK, which is an NHS-run facility, and unfortunately, just keep getting met with the same frustrating response, which is just, no, she's not a suitable candidate. There's not been enough research done. I mean, we've had every excuse. We've had anticonvulsants don't work on Tamsin, so why would this work? I mean, it's like mind-blowing, some of the
I mean, that just shows a lack of basic knowledge about how cannabinoids work, doesn't it? The fact that they can say an anticonvulsant isn't working, so therefore this medicine won't work, just shows how little the understanding is of how this works in the body, doesn't it? It's just
exactly.
You must just feel, and you and your family must just feel so frustrated because it's just you know, it's just having the opportunity to be able to just try it.
Exactly. I mean, that's all we're looking for. We're not sitting in, you know, in a place of just, we're not being unrealistic, we're not sort of praying for a miracle. You know, we've kind of dealt with this for 37 years, or my parents have dealt with it for 37 years. I'm younger than my sister, but I don't think anyone's unrealistic. You know, if this, I don't think that Tamsin's going to be able to wean off all her anticonvulsants and suddenly she's not going to have any seizures, and you know, and it's never going to repair the brain damage, because you know she has severe frontal lobe brain damage. But you know, if it reduced her seizures down just a touch, if it meant that she could sleep through the nights without having as many seizures, like these would all improve you know, her overall health. And so we just want the opportunity to try it. And frustrating, because I've spent the last few years working on this documentary, which you know about, called Sisters Interrupted, which really focuses on my sister and my journey, and you know, her lack of access and epilepsy kind of at its core. And you know, we sat down with a number of different people that said, because my sister and I have the same genetic mutation, there is a very you know, good case for the fact that this might really be a great medicine for my sister too.
Yeah.
So I mean, and then, you know, just to be met with the same closed-minded, frustrating response is just infuriating. And the only way I can really deal with the anger and frustration is to step back and say, I'm not just going to focus on my sister, but I'm going to keep fighting the cause, you know, more broadly, and try to look at it with a positive light and see that it is changing. It's baby steps, but it's changing. It's changing the UK, it's changing the US. It just needs to, like, we need to hurry up with it.
Yeah, we definitely do. And I'm sure there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in that situation for whom, you know, it's being blocked by lack of awareness. And that's what this documentary is all about, right? It's about raising that awareness. So the fact that you've gone through all of that, and that you're still going through all of that, and your family's having to deal with that, and you've turned that into something that to create the change, is like, I'm like, go girl. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So what's the go with the documentary at the minute? Are you in editing? Have you finished? What's the go?
We've pretty much finished. It's funny, we kind of finished the film a few months ago. The only thing we were working on was the soundtrack, which we were really excited about, because we're working with an incredible composer on that. And then actually we just stepped back into edit, which I'm feeling really good about, to be honest with you, because when we stopped the project, you know, it was, I mean, a kind of relief initially, because we've been working on it for so long. You know, all of us were like, we need to kind of go out and try and make some money, and you know, just step back from a very, very emotional and challenging project that had been very consuming for the last few years. And I think it just all allowed a bit of breathing room, and sometimes you need that with a creative project, to perhaps see where the holes are and where you need to kind of keep plugging away. And so recently we just decided that it wasn't actually complete, and that we needed to go back and tweak it again. And I'm feeling really good about that, just because it didn't feel finished. And so that's where we're at. So I think, you know, I say we're pretty much finished, but now we're just jumping back and finishing up some tweaks in post-production, and then we're going to start hopefully shopping it around and getting it out there for the world to see.
I'm really looking forward to seeing this documentary. It feels like you've been giving birth to it for so long, doesn't it? That I've seen it. You know, there's a period of time where every event I went to, there were the girls at the back with the camera, and I was like, wow, they're literally getting every bit of this. It's brilliant.
I know, and it's just definitely changed a lot from the film we set out to make. I mean, we basically were shooting for, you know, a couple of years. We had terabytes and terabytes of footage. We had all the talking heads. You know, we traveled around the UK, Ireland, US, and then we actually decided to can all of the talking heads. Our exec producers turned around to us and said, you know, I think the most interesting thread of this film that's going to be most powerful is really the story of the two sisters. And that was kind of, you know, I think that was challenging for me, just because I don't mind being in the film. I decided to make the film. I was very aware that my sister and I were going to be within the film, but I didn't really set out to make a film just about my sister and I. we had interviewed a lot of other kind of epilepsy patients and neurologists and neuroscience and politicians. And so I was very excited about that side. But then, when you've got experienced experts telling you that that's the most interesting thread, and that's obviously going to have, I think, the biggest impact, because it is able to really tug on those heartstrings. You kind of have to listen. But we always joke about it and say that we've got enough footage that we could make like 5 TV shows after.
You absolutely could. I mean, I've seen how often the girls were filming at those events, and you must have loads. So what so in terms of what you're currently consuming, that I think that'd be interesting. So what strain are you using? You said that you're using CBD. Is it full spec? Is it at what ratio are you on?
I'm using, so I go back and forth between a CBD rich extract, so full spectrum, so 20-1. A strain that's funny because I'm not so good when it comes to strains. I do have, not off the top of my head, I do have it actually in an email, the strains that I was using from my medical cannabis dispensary here in New York. But I can't remember now. And then the other ratio I use is a 1-to-1, so I'll use an equal part CBD to THC. And I really just, I medicate based on how I feel. I don't know if that's the same for you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm guilty of medicating based on how I feel, and I'm always wondering whether that's the right thing to do. Like, okay, so I'm having a spasm or I'm in agony right now, I'll medicate. And I'm always thinking, should I just be like medicating all the time and then I won't end up in that state? So I suppose it's just, I'm still learning. I've been doing this for years and I'm still learning what's best and what to do, what not to do, what strains are good, what strains aren't so good. It's just like it's like a really long university degree, isn't it?
It's so interesting for you to say that, because that's how I feel. I did this really interesting genetic testing recently from a company called DNA. DNA genetics. Yeah. And that was so interesting because, I'm like you. I mean, it's been such a journey of self-medicating, and obviously, we weren't in a position where I could go to my neurologist and say, hey, what's the best, strain, or what's the best ratio that I should use medicinally? When I first started talking to my neurologist, he kind of laughed at me as if I was like a crazy pothead. So it was a real journey, and I went from kind of CBD isolate to CBD full spectrum, and then why does this product it work more effectively than this product? But when I did that genetic testing, it came back and it said the two recommended ratios were a 20-1 and a 1-to-1. And then it listed the term, and it said linalool, which I knew already.
Boom.
Linalool is found in lavender,
very calming.
Very calming. I always responded, very well to lavender as well. And then the other one, which was the only kind of, I guess finding that was really like interesting to me, was linalool with limonene. And limonene, I always was quite cautious of as a terpene because it's very uplifting and it can be very stimulating. But interestingly enough, that I guess when it's combined with the linalool, it has a more of a kind of balancing effect. So that was really, really interesting. And I do also, I'm not sure how you use your medicine in terms of route of administration. I mean, I'm definitely somebody that I use cannabis. I joke that I use cannabis in every orifice of my body, but I really do. I mean,
same. I've not put it in my eye yet or my ear.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah, me neither. But I use it. I'll ingest it. I will vape it. I will use it topically. I use it intravaginally. But I mean, that's really kind of what I use for epilepsy. But then I also have endometriosis as another condition, and that's been such an interesting journey because I started using cannabis a number of years ago. I think about, now I'm trying to remember, 4 years. And about a year into treating my epilepsy solely with medicinal cannabis, meaning I'd weaned off my anticonvulsants, I noticed that my endometriosis pain had improved. And I didn't initially connect the dots at all, because why would I? And there's not, at the time, there really wasn't an abundance of information out there at all. So I just figured that my hormones were beginning to, level out, and that was due to age. And then there was some interesting research coming out of Israel from a scientist called Yuval Kaufman, who was researching cannabidiol and endometriosis. And then so I saw that and I was like, well, maybe my endometriosis pain is improving because of my, cannabinoid usage. So I started using it. I would amp up around the time of my cycle. So a couple of days, before the first day of my cycle, and then during the pain. And then I discovered intravaginal suppositories, and that's when things just began to improve even more. And that really, kind of was the catalyst for me starting this women's health company, Looney, which is what I've been working on for the last year, which I'm super excited about. Now I'm in a position where I definitely still, suffer from a lot of pain with my endometriosis. It is nothing like it used to be. I used to pass out and vomit pretty much every period. Ended up in the emergency room a bunch of times. I had a surgery when I was 27, a laparoscopy, to burn off the scar tissue around my uterus. And now I can function. I mean, haven't vomited once since I started using cannabis. I haven't passed out, haven't ended up in the emergency room, and most importantly, haven't had a second surgery. And I'm meeting women now that have had up to 5 surgeries. Some women are having hysterectomies for endometriosis. So yeah, and we basically, well, I say we, my partner who I met a year ago, I mean, prior to that, I felt like there was a lot of room for innovation, particularly around the suppository. One, just on the formulation front, they were very unsophisticated formulations. I wasn't sure about the safety of the products I was using. It was like 2 companies that I was using, and there felt like there was no real proof of efficacy or safety. And I know, obviously it's challenging to conduct clinical trials, double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trials. That costs a lot of money. It takes years and years. But I think, now I know that there is a lot that can be done, before going into that stage of clinical trials to prove efficacy and safety. And really just getting bringing together the right team of physicians to develop these products. And that's what we've tried to do. So we have an incredible OBGYN on our team, an incredible urologist, a functional integrative medicine practitioner. And it's interesting that both the OBGYN and the urologist were already very familiar with cannabis, using cannabis in their practice. They were, advising a lot of their patients to go home and make their own suppositories for a lot of different conditions. So, we're working towards a September launch right now. We're in prototype phase of two of our products. Our hero product is an intravaginal suppository, and we've worked really hard to innovate on the suppository itself, because when you think of a suppository, you kind of, they have a bit of a stigma. You kind of think of it being this this sort of icky product that you associate with people putting down there, and they're always historically packaged in a plastic blister pack. And we were like, well, surely there's got to be a way to launch products without using any plastic at all, so it's fully sustainable. Working with a regenerative sustainable farm, a small family run farm, and having the right team of doctors behind and formulating these products, and actually conducting some R&D to prove efficacy and safety, and check for cytotoxicity in these products. And we are talking to Harvard Medical School about a clinical study. We're also working on with a group to look at specific gene markers, specific genetic markers, to see, looking at inflammation and pain, and how our products impact that. So yeah, we're really excited. It still feels like kind of early days, but it's called Looney, and we're working to support women with their menstrual cycle. And we aren't a cannabis company or a CBD company. We're using cannabinoids in some of our products because they make sense to the overall efficacy, but we're positioning ourselves as a women's health company. I think that was really important to us, because we didn't want to lean on cannabis to market our products. And I think we need the industry, and we are now at a point where we should be normalizing plant medicine. We've been using plant medicine for hundreds and thousands of years. And so this whole idea of just because of prohibition, now it's kind of like, you know, the forbidden fruits, and we're sort of like using it to market, and everyone thinks it's really trendy and people get excited about CBD and cannabinoids because of prohibition.
Yeah.
And so I think we really wanted to use it intelligently because it made sense to the overall efficacy, but not lean on it to use it to market the products. We just wanted to focus on actually, you know, the bigger picture, which is helping to support women with their menstrual cycle.
You're amazing, Chelsea. Like, absolutely smashing it. That's one thing that I always see in people when I think that when things go to shit and you're suffering, it's about making something good out of it for everybody else. And that's one thing that you've consistently done.
And you as well.
Amazing. It's amazing.
You are exactly the same. And I have a feeling is very, very mutual. And I think that's, you know, I maybe you see that in me because that's what you've done as well. And I think it's I always have so much respect for people that can do that, because I think when you know what it's like to suffer with an illness yourself or with a family member, like it is really, really tough, and it shapes you, and it, you know, it's sort of where I think you get that drive from, but also that desire to just show up in the world and sort of try to help other people in a way you can, and to see the importance of that. You know, I think it's okay to be ambitious and want to do well and make money and all of the rest of it, but I think also if you have that balance of, but also wanting to be of service and help people. I mean, for me, if you were like, we'll break that down, where does that really, really come from? I mean, yes, I'm sensitive, and I'm an empath because I know what it's like to suffer, and I've seen suffering, you know, firsthand in a very real way. So it means I can empathize with other people. But I think also knowing where I was at before I discovered this plant and what it has done for my life. And I think there's a big part of that is like, I feel like I want to give back, because that's been a gift from the universe. And like we said before, there are a lot of people that, you know, I know that haven't had as much success with it. So it's not just like everyone who finds the plant is going to have as much relief as, say, you know, I have had personally. But, you know, to have had that opportunity to improve my health as much as it has improved, and then to not, you know, want to kind of give back or work with the plant would just be crazy. So
yeah, totally. I couldn't agree with you more. It sort of just inspires this, you know, like for me, I guess, you know, then I when I realized the true potential of this plant, and let's face it, we only know a very smidgen of the true potential of the plant. But when I personally saw what it did for me, I was just like, God, like just literally thousands of people around me who are in pain, who are suffering, who are struggling. And I'm just like, the potential of this is huge. How can I not shout about it? Like, how can I like throw an arm around these people and just see, like, let's just try it. Let's see where we go. So yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. Totally. And I'm really excited to see the documentary. I'm really excited to see where you go with this. I suppose I call them pessaries. I mean, like I've made pessaries for women with endometriosis for years, and it's just been it's been the thing. It's been the thing that's really changed. And then I just, you know, and that's just like me in the kitchen with a chocolate molder, you know.
I love that.
I mean, you guys are properly going for it, which is brilliant, because then people in kitchens with chocolate molders, like, we don't have to exist anymore, right?
Right.
So I'm really excited about that project, because I've seen firsthand what that can do as a delivery method for women with endometriosis, and I'm sure you're going to absolutely smash it.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it is just such a fantastic route of administration. You know, I think that that's what we want to encourage, is for people to use medicine in that way, and to normalize it. I mean, you know, I always go back to the fact that, you know, a large majority of women are using a tampon every month. For their period, and so using a suppository is very, very simple and very similar.
I mean, I don't think women would be like, fine. I mean, I think the men would be a bit like, oh, but then they're not going to use it, are they? So that's fine.
Well, it's really funny because we've been, you know, raising money for the past few months, and obviously pitching to a lot of male investors. And, you know, there's always some who kind of, there's like a little bit of a joke about, you know, that they're like, well, obviously, you know, we can't use it. Like, they're curious about it, and we would always joke and say, well, you can try it if you want to.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, has anybody volunteered yet?
None of the men have volunteered yet.
Let me know when one does.
Yeah, I do actually have. There are actually two friends of mine who are a couple who actually did take one of the. They're yet to try it, but they did actually take one of the suppositories to try. But you know, I mean, I've had some cycles that have been so bad. I'm literally just like one in the vagina, one up the bum.
Yeah.
I'm like
everywhere.
topically, I'm everywhere. I'm just like in agony, and I'm just want to get it as much, you know, in my system as possible. So, but you know, it is fantastic, and you know, I'm excited about the innovation and sort of how we've kind of, you know, how we worked to sort of chic up the suppository a little bit, you know, and make it easier to use. I think, you know, I always used to use the kind of classic bullet shaped suppositories, and I think that we've worked on a new shape that I think is actually so much easier to use, because something that I was finding is, you know, melting point was a big one for us as a problem to solve. You know, a lot of the times the suppositories that I would previously use, as soon as you put them in your hand, they would start to melt, and so we felt like there was a lot of room for improvement there. How do we slightly increase the melting point so it still melts at body temperature, but it isn't melting as soon as you put it in your hand? So, you know, a lot of blood, sweat and tears have gone into it, and I'm just excited to get it out there, and we will send you products so that you can try some.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm all for that. And the last question, I think, which I ask everybody is, and this is a big one, is like, you know, I suppose there's lots of different ways in which we can improve the situation, specifically in the UK. So like, if you had a magic wand and you could just wave it over the cannabis space of the UK and have it however you want it, have access however you want it, have roots however you want it, what would that look like?
I mean, I guess it's a hard one, isn't it? Because there isn't one country that I think is doing it perfectly, because, you know, you take, let's look at it by kind of state by state. You sort of look at California, where it's obviously recreationally legal there, and they have a lot of their faults too. And I think that, you know, in a way, a lot of the kind of medical patients are sort of slightly pushed to the side, and I think you know, just to have access in that way can cause a lot of problems. And I think it is important to be really like mindful of some of the issues like cannabis psychosis, and I know in the UK we're very conscious of that, less so than they are here. I guess, you know, I come back to education. I wish we were in a place where we were further along with research, which we should be. You know, due to prohibition, we're not. So I think really pushing the research forward. And I think having educated doctors that can really support patients, and where they can't, working with patients to have an open mind. So, okay, I don't know enough about this condition yet. Unfortunately, the research isn't there. But if you're, you know, open or willing, or you're already using cannabis and it's benefiting you, let's work to make sure you're using safe product, that it's been third party tested, that it's standardized, and let's work together, because I want to educate myself, and I know as a doctor I can learn from you as a patient. Let's keep a journal. Let's, you know, I think more of that attitude where, you know, everyone holds an open mind and wants to educate themselves, and there's no ego involved. My battery's going to die. 1 second. So, you know, I wouldn't just say I'd wave the magic wand and then it's like, you know, it's recreationally legal. I think we have to be really mindful, but it just comes back to education. You know, if you're aware of the fact that, you know, the young male adolescent brain, for example, is a lot more vulnerable, you know, before I think it's the age of sort of 18 or 16, you know, and how it can really impact, like if we can bring children up to understand this and educate children in school about using cannabis recreationally and how it can really impact long term. I think that's really important. So I would just, you know, I would legalize it. I would allow people to grow their own. I would make sure that there's access to, you know, good standardized product, but without it just being controlled by big pharma. You know, I'm more for smaller farms that are producing good quality, using good soil, good farming practices. Sorry, that was quite a long-winded answer, and I
that's
guess
fine. You know, it's a long,
not that deep,
it's a big question. It's a big question, but I like your answer.
I think it's just it's almost quite hard to imagine that we could be in that situation. And I think there is so much work that would need to be done to get us to the dream situation.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it really comes down to education and an open mind, and, you know, removing that ego that exists in the medical community. You know, we're putting sort of doctors on a pedestal, and we see that in America, and it's terrible. The whole country is addicted to opioids. It's like, because they trusted, you know, their doctor a lot of the time, the doctor's signing the prescription. So I think, you know, we as the patients have to be intuitive in the way we approach things, and be cautious, and, you know, not just take everything that our doctors say, you know.
I agree. It's a paternalistic system at the moment, isn't it, Western medicine? We, you know, the doctors are trained in biology, but they're also trained to match that symptom or condition with a pharmaceutical product. And they aren't trained to look at other things, are they? And I suppose patients don't feel empowered enough to be able to make their own decisions. It's like, well, the doctor said so, they know more than me, so I'm going to have to, and it places the position of power, the patient's right down here. And really, to be well, you need to be empowered. Otherwise, the healing doesn't take place, does it?
Definitely.
So I think that's a really key point.
And I think that's also, you know, very much Western medicine is sort of treating the symptom, isn't it, really? And I definitely feel like that. You know, for years I would go to my doctor and say, I feel absolutely terrible depression, anxiety on this medication. You know, the only thing he really cared about was eliminating or reducing the seizures. And it wasn't enough for me. It wasn't enough. I wanted, you know, I want to sit with a doctor who cares about my mental health day to day. And I'm seeing so many, you know, I started this women's group for women with epilepsy or mothers of children with epilepsy. And one thing that I'm seeing, which is quite scary, is the amount of people that are just choosing not to take medication and are having seizures because that is how bad the medication's making them feel. Wow. You know, and I think that is just terrible that we're you know, we're there. And I think if as you say, they come on the same level as the patient, and there is just like, you know, a bit more of a kind of supportive, I know I use a lot of traditional Chinese medicine, and that approach is really like always looking at the root, always looking at things holistically. Like, that's the approach that we need for patients to feel supported.
Damn right, well said. Brilliant. All right, well, now Chelsea's fixed the world, I'm going to stop the recording there. Thanks so much for having us, Chelsea.
Thank you.